Welcome into Flag for Discussion, episode 28 for Monday, September 22nd. My name is Farbod Merkazi. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am solo once again for today's show. Look, we're going to get back together. The band will be back together for our Week 5 preview show on Thursday. But just for today, you are stuck with me. There's so much to get into. Obviously, we have to talk about Oklahoma setting a school record in sacks. They're then not spoiling the Jackson Arnold revenge game theory and drama that was leading up to it. We got to talk about Nebraska losing in a one-score game again. Dabo and Clemson lost. They fall to 1-3. Billy Napier, is this the week that he finally gets fired at Florida? I'm not calling for it, but there's signs point to maybe. Signs point to maybe there. And Indiana, is it time to actually start taking them seriously? There's a lot of conversation there of, have we gotten past the talking point of Indiana being a bad team win merchant? And we're going to get into all of that. Before we do, make sure you're subscribed to us on YouTube at Flag for Discussion. We're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast app at Flag for Discussion. We're on TikTok at Flag4 Discussion and on Twitter at F4 Discussion. You would think with the amount of times that I do this that I would get those handles down, but I still haven't been able to get a good handle on that. No pun intended. All right, let's get into our first game, the big one. I already mentioned it, but Oklahoma beat Auburn 24-17. First off, we both picked Oklahoma to win this game and to cover the 6.5 point spread. So shout out that safety at the end that took our total over the 6.5. Very much appreciate that. I was looking down the barrel of a 1-4 week, and that at least made it a little bit sweeter with a 2-3. Still not great, but you can live with a 2-3. You can't really live with a 1-4. All right. So a couple quick stat lines here just to set the table. John Mateer, he goes 21-32, 220 yards, had a passing touchdown. He also added some 29 rushing yards, had a rushing TD. Here's the thing with this game. If you didn't watch the game, and I just told you some basic stats of Jackson Arnold, 21-32, 220 yards, and just the passing stats, it would sound like Auburn had won that game. If I told you that Oklahoma went 3 of 12 on third down, if I told you that Oklahoma had 9 penalties for almost 100 yards, if I told you that Oklahoma lost the turnover battle, if I told you any of those stats or the combination of those stats, you would just automatically, at least I would, sign up and say Auburn won the game. They upset Oklahoma and Jackson Arnold got his revenge on the Sooners. Obviously, that didn't happen. Obviously, Oklahoma panned out. Oklahoma battled through some of the adversity they faced, and they won the game. Brent Venables, I think this was a Brent Venables masterclass. I mentioned this in our preview show. I thought when a genius defensive mind goes up against a younger or lesser experienced quarterback, he will try to confuse the living crap out of him. And it certainly doesn't hurt when you're Brent Venables and you have the defensive line and the front seven that Oklahoma does. Oklahoma might have the best front seven, best defensive line in the SEC. And if you're used to the Oklahoma teams of the late 20 teens, you might think that, one, Oklahoma's in the SEC, what? But two, there's no way that Oklahoma's strength is on their defense. And I can guarantee and confidently say right now that it is. John Mateer, he wasn't perfect at the beginning of the game, and especially not in the first half. But you know when he was perfect when it mattered. He went, I have the stat, he was nails. He went 5 for 5 to set up the field goal that gave Oklahoma the lead early in the fourth. Auburn answered. They took the lead back. And Mateer, what does he do when he gets the ball back? Goes 4 for 4, 62 yards on the drive, caps it off with a 9-yard touchdown run. And that would end up being the eventual game winner. Now they went for 2, didn't get it. Jackson Arnold ends up getting the ball. Auburn gets the ball on their side of the field. And man, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Oklahoma's defense really stood up, really showed out, and stopped Auburn and Jackson Arnold from being able to really do anything on that last drive, which eventually ended up culminating in a safety. The first 3 games of the year, Oklahoma had 3.5 sacks. This game alone, they had 10 sacks. I mean, if you want to shout out certain guys, we got to shout out Mason Thomas. We got to shout out Jaden Jackson. We got to shout out David Stone. That's the entire reason that Oklahoma stayed in this game, because Auburn played a good game. And Auburn had a pretty good game plan coming in with Jackson Arnold. Didn't let him beat themselves. They didn't want to beat themselves. But the more fascinating thing to me is when you think about defensive coaches in general, a lot of times they can seem to be the more conservative the coach. Like offensive coaches are the aggressive ones. They're going to want to go for 2. They're going to want to go for it on 4th down more. You see that discrepancy a lot more in college football, in the NFL compared to college football. But defensive coaches a lot of times want to play safe because they want to win games using their defense in the run game. They want to control the clock. They want to create a game script that they can easily replicate and do to every team, control the game in general. What Brent Venables did going into this game is he said, we're not going to – Auburn has Cam Coleman. Auburn has Eric Singleton Jr. They got an excellent receiving corps, and they got Jackson Arnold who can get the ball to them. But what if we take the gamble and use our unreal defense to try to just make sure Jackson Arnold doesn't even have a shot at getting the ball to those receivers? Auburn's run game wasn't great. Auburn's offensive line wasn't great. And Oklahoma feasted on that. There were a couple plays, though, that if Jackson Arnold hit Cam Coleman down the field, because Oklahoma, like I said, took a gamble, left Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton Jr. on an island for much of the game. There wasn't any extra help behind them. They basically said, we're going to focus on making sure Jackson Arnold doesn't even have the opportunity to get to him. Well, he did a couple times, and he missed. If he hit those passes, if he hit those shots, we could be talking about an Auburn win or a decisive Auburn win here. But that's not what happened. I picked Oklahoma to win, and I'm happy about that I was right. But I'm thoroughly impressed with Auburn. That defense is nasty. That offense looks a lot further along than I predicted, than I thought, and they're ahead of schedule. I know they went down to Baylor. They beat them. So they had played power competition before today, but I think today, before the Oklahoma game, what we thought was this is going to be the test. How far along really is Auburn? And I think they passed that test with flying colors. I'm not saying that they're going to go off, recover, become the SEC champs, or get into the SEC title game, but at least with Auburn that they can handle and they can compete with anybody now. The way they played in this game, they can absolutely compete and play with anybody now. Just a quick point. In the first half, there was a touchdown pass Oklahoma had, and the SEC's come out now talking about how there was a deception TD on Oklahoma's first touchdown of the game. The quote's right next to me. The SEC came out and said, if properly officiated, the second down play should have resulted in an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty of 15 yards assessed from the previous spot. So no touchdown. ESPN's Matt Austin, who's a rules analyst of that game for ESPN, said right on the spot, this shouldn't be a touchdown. This should be a 15-yard unsportsmanlike penalty. Isaiah Satania, he was the receiver. Basically what he did, walks to the end of the field, walks towards the sideline as if he's being subbed out, but he stays there. Auburn's looking around like, oh, he's being substituted. We don't have to worry about him. We have to worry about what's going on the field. Oklahoma all of a sudden recognizes nobody's covering Satania, and they quickly get set. John Mateer drops back, finds Satania for an easy touchdown. The actual SEC rule is no simulated replacements or substitutions may be used to confuse opponents. No tactic associated with substitutions or the substitution process may be used to confuse the opponent. Hugh Freeze, Auburn's coach, came out afterwards, said they said they didn't hear us trying to call a timeout. They as in the refs. We were instructed all offseason about deception plays and things, so we'll see what's said. I really don't know what will be said about that. Obviously, Hugh Freeze and Auburn are pissed about it. I mean, they lost by a touchdown. That could have been the that could have been the difference in them getting the ball back or going to overtime and coming away with a win. They have all the right to be annoyed about that, but the officials missed it. And I'll argue, if you didn't give up 10 sacks, or if you could protect your quarterback better, control the ball a little bit more, run the ball better, you wouldn't even be in this position to complain about a missed call that ended up in as a touchdown. Obviously, you got to get the calls right, but in general, I don't think that was the reason Auburn lost the game. What this means in general for me, for Oklahoma, I don't think Oklahoma proved that they're about to run the table and become the SEC champs. What I think happened, though, is if you look at Oklahoma, you knew that they had a good quarterback. You knew that their receiving core was solid. You knew that that defense was special. But Brent Venables going into the year was on as hot a seat as Billy Napier at Florida. And now he's 4-0. And he's proven now that he can go up against Michigan earlier in the year and now Auburn today. It's Saturday, and take care of business. They're 4-0. They're only going up from here. And most exciting part of it is now you know that Oklahoma can truly compete. Not only compete, Oklahoma can truly beat any team left on their schedule. They have an absolute gauntlet. So that's why I feel uncomfortable making any bold predictions of Oklahoma being SEC champs or appearing in the title game. But what I saw from Oklahoma that game was a playoff team, and a damn good one at that. I just want to give another hats off to Brent Venables. This is a guy who was almost fired, had to give money back as part of his contract after the disappointing season they had last year. He's had 2 disappointing years. He's had a good one in between, and now they're looking like they're back to being pretty good. Good for Brent Venables. You hired the right offensive coordinator this time. You bring in the right quarterback. Your team's gelling. Your defense is as good as advertised. Good for Brent Venables. I'm excited to see where they go from here. It's hard. Like I mentioned, 5 of their 8 remaining games are against teams that are currently ranked in the top 20, and 2 of those 8 are teams that are ranked within the top 10. So they're not going up against many cupcakes from here on out. They're going to have to duplicate a lot of today's performance moving forward week after week after week. If they can do that, which I think they are capable of it, they can be in the SEC title game, and you could expect that. But this is college football. These are 18 to 22-year-old kids. We've seen crazier things of teams just not showing up flat, and things can happen. But for now, Oklahoma's 4-0. Good for Brent Venables. Good for John Mateer. Good for Ben Arbuckle. Good for that defensive line for absolutely showing out. Before we get to our next game, let's talk about our picks. I went 2-3. I got Oklahoma, Indiana, and I got Oklahoma and Indiana right. I missed on Utah, I missed on SMU, and I missed on Nebraska. Jace went 3-2. He missed on Nebraska. He missed on Illinois, but he got Texas Tech right, Oklahoma right, and TCU right. So for the season standings, Jace was 10-10. He's now over 500. So congrats, Jace. You're 13-12 now. I was 13-7. I had a bigger lead. Now I'm 15-10. I'm still 5 games over 500 on the green, but I've had a couple of bad weeks of late. So I really hope that this isn't a trend. I hope that this coming week I nail it with my picks and we can come back here and I've extended my lead again. Our shots in the bark, if you haven't been part of our shows in the past, we pick one underdog that's 8.5 points or greater every week each. If they cover the spread, we get 1 point. If they win outright, we get 2 additional points, so 3 total points. Pick Purdue plus 24.5 against Notre Dame this week. That didn't hit. I was really upset about that because it was 2 points off. I think it was a 56-30 game. Base pick Tulane and Ole Miss. Tulane was an 11.5 point favorite. Underdog, and that didn't hit either. Right now for the season standings on shots on the bark, Jace remains in the lead, 5 points total. I have 3. But we're going to try to get him back next time. Look, the Tulane Ole Miss thing, I had a buddy tell me something really interesting because at least in his read of the game. He took the over in that game, and this is complete tangent. But I asked him, "Why'd you take the over?" I just trying to pick his brain, and he said, "Just think about the coaches that are in this game. You got Lane Kiffin, who, while it's unconfirmed, the rumors about him wanting the Florida job if it opens up has been spread like wildfire for the second year in a row. And then you got John Summerall, who, other than Alex Golish, is probably the G5 coach most talked about to be the next hire for a top tier Power 4 program. So a lot of people were saying, well, how convenient would it be if both of these coaches want to show out? Lane wants to show out, just prove that he can win, and he has a system that works, and Florida should hire him if they fire Billy. And then, by the way, Ole Miss all of a sudden opens up. Maybe that's a spot for John Summerall. So my buddy thought the over would hit because both of these coaches would want to show out. I mean, there's a talent discrepancy between both teams. There's a level of competition discrepancy between both teams, and we saw what happened. Ole Miss destroyed Tulane. And then our flag for discussion parlay, we pick a 4-legger every week, put $5 down on it, and if one of them hit, it would cover our season total. So ours hit a couple weeks ago, but unfortunately, ours hit a couple weeks ago. So now we're kind of playing with house money. But for the season, we are now 13 of 18 on legs. This past week, we went 2 for 4. We had Nebraska money line. Obviously, that didn't hit. Our maybe worst pick of this podcast history was Cal minus 12.5 against San Diego State. We were JKS believers, and Cal got shut out by San Diego State. The ones that we got right, Miami minus 7.5 and Illinois, Indiana over 52.5. All right, that's our picks preview. Let's get into another fun game. Michigan beat Nebraska. Michigan beat Nebraska 30-27. There's not a ton of breakdown here. Bryce Underwood went 12 of 22, 122 pass yards, 61 rushing yards, and had a rushing TD. He was fine through the air, pretty good, great on the ground. Raiola went 308 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. And this is another one of those games that if I just told you the quarterback stats on the outset, you would just assume Nebraska won. Raiola was a lot more effective. They were home. Nebraska was like everyone's pick heading into this game. And one of the things I said in our previous show was if Nebraska's truly back, if you truly believe in that year 3 Matt Rhule theory, then this game is the game that Nebraska has to win. You have gotten past the point of struggling against teams you should beat because you're beating teams you should beat. Now, obviously, once you play maybe in Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, you'll probably lose those, but you're not at the point where you can go up against the elite of the elite. But at least in your progression can you win your toss-up games? Can you win the 50-50, the pick'em games? And this was one of those. And unfortunately, going into this game, I just assumed that this was that moment for Nebraska. This was that game that they would look back on in 3 years, 2 years with Matt Rhule, where they're really successful in the Big Ten, maybe playoff contenders. And they can look back and be like, that was the moment, that Michigan game, that Michigan win was the moment we announced to the world that we're back. Look, Nebraska is a great team, but early on in the game, there was a missed field goal. There was an interception. Nebraska, I think, in general, for me, suddenly started looking like the Scott Frost Nebraska days. I'm like, oh man, it's just like the football gods don't want it for them, and they don't want them to be truly back. And then all of a sudden, before half, Raiola connects on a Hail Mary down the field to tie the game. And for me, I like to dive into more of like the less of the granular football X's and O's sometimes. And I truly thought I was like, that was a moment that maybe the football gods are taking the spell that they cast on this program off. Lo and behold, Nebraska couldn't stop Michigan from running when they needed to. And Michigan ran all over them. They ran for 290 total yards. Justice Haynes, 17 carries, 149 yards. Jordan Marshall had 6 carries, 80 yards, and a touchdown. Justice Haynes scored a touchdown. Bryce Underwood ran for 61 yards on himself, scored a touchdown. Every down that you would see be like, oh man, it's a big play here. Nebraska needs to stop. third down, whatever it is. Every time that you thought that this would happen, they needed it and they could go out and get it because they have the playmakers to do so. Michigan ran and got the first down. Michigan ran and got the yardage they needed to get into field goal range or to get into the red zone to keep the drive going. And Michigan, it felt like Nebraska was playing catch up all day. And even though they're much better than past Nebraska teams, there was an aspect of it felt Nebraska was still the inferior team on the field, even though they have the talent, they have elite talent everywhere now. The other aspect, Nebraska themselves went 2 for 13 on third down. They had 21 first downs to Michigan's 16, but the fact that you're eliminating yourself from so many possessions on third down, that's a big point of emphasis there. And like I said, the frustrating part is if you're Nebraska, if I told you the QB numbers, Raiola outplayed Underwood. There was an even turnover battle. The total yards were pretty even. You would think that Nebraska won. And it's another one-score loss. Another game that just, like, for me, screams that this program is just not over the hump yet. It might be prisoner of the moment to say that because we could look back on this in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and Nebraska still hasn't suffered a second loss. They're right in the thick of it for the Big Ten title game picture. And for me, it was just like I thought Nebraska's luck was turning back towards them, but there was just so much that was still almost haunting them. Getting more into like a football analytical spot, Michigan looked really good running the ball. I don't think they have the skill talent receiver wise to make a big splash this current season, but Bryce Underwood looks like a guy who's going to be a really good quarterback. I don't think he's really good yet, but he's damn good, damn talented, and he's just a true freshman. So you have all the hope in the world. Michigan's one of those teams that because they have Bryce and he's proven that he can compete at the highest of levels, Michigan's one of those teams that's going to be a transfer destination next year. Not only with NIL, but the best skill talent, receivers, tight ends, offensive linemen, running backs are going to want to play with Bryce Underwood. They're going to want to go to Michigan. So maybe even if this year isn't the year for Michigan, you think about how good that team could be next year, another year of Bryce Underwood's development. That team could be scary because we know that they're always going to have a good run game. We know that they're always going to have a good defense. But if you get some skill talent, some true playmakers who can separate and get Bryce Underwood some easy looks, that could be a Michigan team no one wants to face. Good for Biff Poggi, the interim coach for Michigan. He finishes his tenure as an interim 2-0. Sherrone Moore will be back next week. He's going to be riding the momentum that Michigan has now. And it's true momentum because they have faults. At least we know that the offense can go get down the field, can score. I'm interested in what will happen more once they play even more of the elite teams. Who, like, they're going to dare Bryce Underwood try to beat them. And if Bryce Underwood can make the plays, Michigan could be a playoff contender this year. I just think that's going to be more for next year. For me, the biggest point that I made for this game is Nebraska had their chances. Nebraska whiffed on a couple chances, and Michigan kept running the ball down the field every time they could, and Nebraska just couldn't stop them. And look, good for Michigan. Tough loss for Matt Rhule in Nebraska, but look, this stuff happens. Maybe I was too harsh on Nebraska earlier, but this stuff happens. This is still a program on an upwards trajectory. I just thought that this could be the game that really where Nebraska really showed out. Moving to maybe one of the more fun games to pick of last week, Indiana destroyed. Let me say that again. Destroyed. Well, I gotta say it one more time. Indiana destroyed Illinois. Indiana beat Illinois 63-10. Curt Cignetti, that guy's an assassin. That guy doesn't care who's coaching, who's playing on the other side. He doesn't care what kind of lead he has. He just wants more. He was interviewed, I think, at halftime or so. Like he was asked, like, what are you looking for the next half? He said more points, and walked away. I don't think people realize how good of a job Chris Cignetti has done in his first 2 years at Indiana. Indiana's not a program that's supposed to be in this position. Indiana's not a program that's supposed to be feared on the football field. Indiana's not a program that's supposed to be consistent Big Ten contenders or playoff contenders. Last year, Indiana obviously had an incredible regular season, but they were almost everyone's darling because they were a surprise. And there was this argument that came out about them that they haven't played anybody. They're going to get destroyed the second they play anybody with a pulse. And honestly, that came to be true. They got beat once they got to the playoff. But you know that if you're Kurt Cignetti, that is not a narrative that you like floating around your program, because in the end of it, those are still a team of 85 or whatever players who are busting their ass, executing and doing and working their hardest to try to make every play happen. Look, they lost in the playoff last year, but now they're coming into this year. They hadn't played anybody with a pulse so far, and we said it going into this week. This is going to be a test of telling us who the real Illinois is and who the real Indiana is. I think, just a side caveat, we got a lot more info on who the real Indiana is, because I think Illinois is still a great team. Indiana just boat raced them. Indiana was home. Indiana went 8 for 11 on third down. Illinois went 1 for 10. Indiana had 31 first downs. Illinois had 9. Indiana rushed the ball. Indiana had 579 total yards. Illinois had 161. Indiana had 372 rushing yards. Illinois had 2 rushing yards. Obviously, these are sack adjusted. College football, quarterback gets sacked, it goes against the team's total rushing totals. Kind of a dumb rule, but that's how it is. My takeaway on this game in general was, if this Indiana team takes the field against the top 5 teams in the country, they're going to be right there. I don't think this is a team in Indiana anymore that you can scoff at and say they haven't played anybody. They proved that they can compete with anybody. They can score with anybody. Fernando Mendoza, excellent quarterback. He was almost cast aside by Cal, or he left, whatever the story is. And he was recruited by Georgia too, but he chose Indiana. He knew he was going to start there, and he knew he was going to have a system that would work. Indiana's defense, a lot better than people think. And going into this week, I said it on this show, on our Thursday preview show last week. Indiana, if they smell blood, if Curt Cignetti smells blood, if you keep letting him convert third downs, keep letting him keep possession of the ball, they're going to score. They're going to score fast. They're going to score often. And one of the reasons I picked Indiana last week, this side note, this game wasn't one of those games that like you had an easy lean one way or another. I think both teams were excellent. Indiana was favored, but they were ranked 10 spots lower than Illinois in the AP poll. For me, this was a game that like you couldn't really pick. But one of the reasons I picked Indiana to win was I saw more of a path to Indiana taking the ball whenever they got it, scoring, maybe getting a quick stop or whatever, because Illinois is an excellent team. They can go down the field and score too. But Indiana is relentless offensively. And eventually they add on, and they keep that foot on the neck. They twist that knife, whatever analogies you want to use. They want to destroy teams. Curt Cignetti doesn't care about just winning. He wants to make a statement, and damn sure he did right there. Like I said, that Indiana team that showed up on Saturday can beat anybody in the country. We'll learn a lot about Indiana in the next couple of weeks. Iowa, they get to play Iowa's defense. Can they put up the same style offensive numbers on Iowa? Or will that be a rubber meets road moment of, man, Iowa's defense kind of slowed down Indiana. I still think Indiana would have the offense to eventually outlast an Iowa team, but that's going to be a big test. And in 2 weeks, a game that no one really was writing down as a potential like college game day destination or Big Noon kickoff destination, or just as one of the biggest games of the year, Indiana's going to Eugene to play Oregon in 2 weeks. Obviously, we will know a lot about Oregon next week when they play Penn State in Happy Valley, but Indiana's a couple massive tests coming up. And I think if they go into those games with this style, with this same level of execution, there's no real reason you can tell me that they're not going to be able to either win or come pretty close to or compete very hard in those games. I love everything about Coach Sig. I love everything about Indiana. And I think this is more of those games that like you see narratively people starting to change their hearts and minds, their perceptions on a program. Like I said last year, Indiana was that program that everybody loved because it was Coach Sig. You could make the cigarette jokes, whatever. It was a program that like wasn't really playing anybody. They were fun. They have a fun offense. They were destroying teams, but they got beat in the playoff and that's where like the stigma or whatever you want to call it on Indiana came up of, yeah, they're not a real championship level team. They just beat up on the teams they should. I think this week's game against Illinois, that proved otherwise. I want to talk quickly about Illinois, though. Look, I think Illinois is an excellent football team, and rightfully so. Brett Bielema is a really great head football coach. They evaluate and recruit talent that fits Illinois football. They develop that talent, and they become a window program. They'll choose a year. Like, it's not obviously easy to do so, but for a lot of Illinois people, this season was the season that was circled. This was their window. This was, we're going to have a senior quarterback. We're going to have Hank Beatty. We're going to have a lot of guys that aren't just freshmen or sophomores developing. We're going to be seniors. We're going to have guys who've been through every aspect of college football. Now, I think this is an aspect that we saw 2 years ago with Michigan. They use a lot of their NIL not to go out and recruit guys, new guys, but to keep their juniors, turn them into seniors, add one more year of seasoning under their belt, and really show out. They won the national championship. Last year, we saw the same thing. A lot of people made comments about Ohio State's team, like Jeremiah Smith or Will Howard. A lot of that team, especially that defense for Ohio State last year, was guys who could have gone to the NFL the year before. But Ohio State used NIL to their benefit, brought those guys back. Another year cooking, another year seasoning was not only beneficial for those guys, but they won the national championship. Now, this for me, Illinois is a smaller version of that, a lesser talented version of that. They are senior laden, sure. They have a senior quarterback who's an excellent quarterback in Luke Altmaier, sure. But to me, and I said it last year to Jace off pod before the pod ever existed, I just think there's a ceiling. I just think there's a cap there. And I think eventually the way they design their game plans, if you score quick and often, they're not going to be able to catch up to you. They're not built to play catch up. They're built to be front runners. They're built to be ahead. Let that defensive line get after you. Use the run game to their benefit. I think they're an excellent football team. Brett Bielema is an excellent coach, but they've got a ceiling on them. They've got a cap on them. And I think Saturday, I keep saying tonight, I think Saturday really showed the difference between a team that's a good team with a ceiling going up against a team that at their best can compete against anybody in the country. And that's the short and sweet of it. I think both teams are very good teams. I still want to see more from Indiana to confirm my early thoughts that they could be something really special this year. And we're going to get that in the coming weeks. Indiana made a statement. Curt Cignetti and Fernando Mendoza and that whole roster made a statement on Saturday, beating Illinois 63-10. Texas Tech looks for real. Will Hammond, I mean, they churn out quarterbacks who can constantly make special plays and make things happen. Texas Tech beat Utah 34-10. I couldn't believe this outcome. I picked Utah to win. I picked Utah to win the Big 12, and they still can. But Texas Tech looks for real, man. Texas Tech is a really great case study, and this is not in any way bashing them, but a really good case study of we've had a good team, but if all of a sudden you get an infusion of money, infusion of NIL help, how easily can we go and make that a great team using the portal? They brought in so much talent through the portal, and it's shown. That, first of all, I want to. This game was ugly. This game was 10-3. Utah, every time Utah couldn't really get anything going offensively. Pretty disappointed in Devin Dampier and Jason Beck. But with that said, anytime that Utah had a chance or anytime Utah started moving the ball, making plays offensively, it felt like Texas Tech was just punching the ball out, forcing fumbles, forcing turnovers. Maybe not getting the turnover every time, but at least forcing some issues for the Utah offense. Utah was never able to get into rhythm. Texas Tech's offense and Texas Tech's defense was unreal on Saturday. And this is on the road at Rice Eccles, which is one of the hardest places in the country to play. Very underrated place. Most people don't even recognize that, but it's a really hard place in the country to play. Texas Tech walked in there, hung around. It was a pretty ugly game. Obviously, middle of the game, Baron Morton, after he's thrown 2 interceptions, he goes out with an injury. At that point, it was 10-3. Texas Tech had the lead, but for me, I was like, Utah's going to win this game now, huh? Because Texas Tech lost their quarterback. They throw the ball for a living. They don't really run the ball. I would imagine Utah's defense is about to feast, and we're going to really see what a Utah team looks like against this Texas Tech team. That didn't happen. They tied it up at one point, and then I put my phone down for what felt like 5 minutes. It might have been longer. And all of a sudden, I look up, it's 27-10 Texas Tech, and then eventually became 34-10, and that was lights out night for Utah. You feel pretty bad for Kyle Whittingham and Devin Dampier, but you feel just elated for Joey McGuire and that Texas Tech team. Texas Tech now has the top number 1 odds if you in Vegas to win the Big 12. Obviously, a lot still has to go down. They got a decent schedule going forward, but Will Hammond coming into that game for Baron Morton, he looked legit, and he stepped up when he needed to, and they made those plays, man. That's all I can say about that. Utah didn't make the plays, or when they did make plays, Texas Tech made a more important play and forced the ball out, or stopped them a yard short, or whatever it was. That was it. It didn't feel like an ass kicking, but it was an ass kick because it was so ugly for a while. And as a sports fan, you kind of look at it from both teams' perspectives. All of a sudden, like midway through the second quarter, I was like, okay, it's a tight game, but it feels like Texas Tech is up by 3 scores. Because it feels like Utah had no way to get the ball down the field, or when they did, it was just a series of unfortunate events. But Texas Tech, even though Utah was stopping them, you know they have that offensive explosion potential. So for me, I was like, if Utah doesn't right the ship, it's going to be lights out, and it was. A couple more things. Dabo Swinney, Clemson, they lost again. This time to Syracuse. There was a weird delay in the middle of the game. So we kind of got to see. I kind of wondered, would their momentum have fizzled out, and would Clemson eventually come back? That didn't happen. If we were talking about a Mount Rushmore of terrible picks that both Jason and I made so far in our first year on this show, the Cal minus 12.5 pick for our flag for discussion 4-legger last week would be on there. Cal got shut out, lost 34-0 to San Diego. But every other spot would be everything Jason and I said about Clemson going into this year. And I've seen your texts, I've seen your comments, anyone who's reached out talking about how wrong we were on Clemson. Go look at most other people who actually make money to do what we're doing. A lot of people were high on Clemson. I just thought, man, Senior Layden brought in this is Kate Klubnik's 3rd year with Garrett Riley as OC. They brought in a real defensive coordinator. Things aren't working. And Dabo Swinney last week, we all know the quote. He said, if they want me gone, they can send me on my way. If they're tired of winning, they can send me on my way. I won't stop. I'm 55. I'll go somewhere else and win. I ain't going to the beach. Well, Dabo, it might not be your choice anymore. I don't think he's going to be fired, but I think the level of tone deaf that you can, or bullshit that you can reach as a head coach eventually exceeds a point of no return. When you're winning, you can say a lot of things, and your fan base is like, meh, I don't know if I love that, but at the same time, we're winning, or my team looks good, things are fine, let's just keep it going. And that was a lot of the Dabo experience. And they were winning, they were consistently competing for ACC title appearances. They were in the playoff last year, so I'm not saying everything's lost, but a lot of the things that he said at those moments were not believing in NIL. The second players get paid, he doesn't want to coach anymore. The name, image, and likeness comment on God. Like everything that he said at that moment, you fans were able to brush that off because he was winning. Well, now he's not. And look, unless he wants to change, unless he wants to get with the times and realize that the transfer portal is actually a tool that teams have to use, and if you don't use it, it's a dereliction of your duty as a head coach. Unless he gets with the times and realize at a program like Clemson, NIL is important to be used to stay on top. It doesn't matter if the ACC's down 1 year or not. You're not there. When Dabo took over, and one of the reasons he's so frustrated all the comments, it makes sense. Clemson wasn't Clemson before Dabo got there. And they were a good football program, but they were never seen as a blue blood. Dabo turned them into that. So he's looking at it as, you guys aren't grateful for my work. Well, here, unfortunately, sorry for the here and now, sorry for being prisoners of the moment. We've been saying this for years now. You're leading your program down a tough path, especially without depth. The other hard part with Dabo is, I said it going into this year, one of the reasons I picked Clemson to be so good this year is because of how talented they are with their seniors. But I also said they're not going to be this good for a very long time afterwards, unless they start using the transfer portal. Because Dabo Swinney and Clemson, while they used to recruit at the highest levels in the country, have had a couple pretty downward looking, still top 25 ranked recruiting classes in the last couple of years. Well, those are the classes they're going to be taking over for this senior group that is 1-3 already. So they're still probably going to be good. They still probably compete for the ACC, but they're not. Dabo's dangerously close to moving them off the path, off the pedestal of being the team in the ACC. Whether they win the ACC that year or not, everyone always says, okay, how do we get past Clemson? Dabo and his team are dangerously close to falling off that path. One more coach to talk about, Billy Napier, Florida. They lose. They're also 1-3. Billy Napier is now 20-22 at Florida. Just a reminder, Dan Mullen got fired for going 34-15 at Florida. I said it to Jace a couple weeks ago. If, and one more time, if Billy Napier were to be fired by Florida, it's going to happen early this week, because we're already past the point of no return. For me, it feels like Florida kind of wants to give him a chance to recover the same way they did last year. And mind you, last year, if Billy Napier was fired, the decision was made. Things were in the works of him getting fired. The press conference was set up, and then they decided to bring him back and keep him. There were some underhanded boosters or donors or whatever that played a part in keeping him. To me, it feels like we're past that point. To me, it feels like there's no more time to play around with it anymore. And look, what do you get if you keep him? Let's say they recover again, they bounce back, they don't quit, and they finish the year 7-5, which by Florida standards is bad. But if you're looking at it as a 1-3 team, that means they went 6-2 for the rest of the year. If they do that, then all of a sudden you're like, man, maybe we got something next year. Well, that's what happened last year. And I have to remind everybody, going 7-5, 8-4, 9-3 is not the goal at Florida. You're not Kentucky. You're the University of Florida. The point is to always strive for the best, and just striving for a potential 1 year is not good enough. So I think, while I'm not calling for it, I think Billy Napier has probably coached his last game at Florida. I think the information or the news report of him being fired will come out this week. If he's not fired, then I have no idea when he's going to be fired. I truly don't. They're 1-3. They have a bye week. That is, I jumped my own take. The reason I think he's gonna be fired this week is because if you look at UCLA, when did they fire Deshaun Foster? 1-3, bad loss, leading up to a bye week. It gives them a chance, gives them almost 2 whole weeks to bring in an interim, install an interim, and really start developing the team around that interim's vision for the rest of the season. It's not going to be perfect, but at least it gives your team a fighting chance at kind of salvaging what's left of the year. That's why I think if he's going to be fired, it would be this week. If you're looking at Florida's schedule for the rest of the year, I mean, they have a bye. They're 1-3 right now, and then they got Texas. They got Texas A&M, Mississippi State, who's 4-0, and all of a sudden looking like a team you can't just look past. You might be able to beat them, but you can't look past them anymore. They got Georgia, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Florida State. They're at risk of being underdogs and losing in every game for the rest of the year, or the magic of last year recovering and saving Billy's job the way they did last year probably won't happen again. You're at a real risk of a 1-4 win season. At this point, I don't know what else there is to be said about Billy Napier's experience. He's probably a good football coach, probably a good guy. Hasn't worked at Florida. That's the bottom line. And if people don't like the talking about a coach getting fired, you're the University of Florida. You better be figuring this out. That in general is most of the topics I wanted to get to today. It was a really fun week 4. ASU won on a last second kick. There were a lot of fun outcomes that happened. USC put on a pretty good performance offensively. We got to talk about USC maybe Wednesday. Are they for real? Michigan State gave USC their damnedest, but it wasn't enough. USC, Jada Maiyava, that team is able to score the ball. Their defense still isn't elite, but they're better. So if you have Lincoln Riley's play calling, you have a good quarterback and that can play within the scope of his offense, they can be something for real this year. They got a lot of tests. They're probably not the most talented team in the Big Ten, but I think if you're any Big Ten school, you're probably a little bit more scared of USC now than maybe you were going into the year. Washington looks good. Ole Miss looks good. I thought Ole Miss's offense was locked to be really good, but their defense scared me with the way they played against Arkansas last week. That, even though they played Tulane's a really good G5 program. That appears to be somewhat fixed, at least. And then speaking of Arkansas, just an unfortunate way to lose against Memphis. They were just trying to run the ball one more time, get a little bit closer, take up more clock, call timeout, kick a game-winning field goal. What happens? You fumble it away. Memphis takes it back. Memphis wins the game. So a lot of things happen week 4, but let me tell you about week 5 real quick. And Jace will be back on Thursday for our week 5 preview show. We got Penn State, Oregon. We got Georgia, Bama. We got Ole Miss, LSU, A&M, Auburn, Washington, Ohio State, Illinois, USC, Arkansas, Notre Dame, Iowa, Indiana, ASU, TCU. There is no week leading maybe past this that is going to be as exciting as this one. And the only thing I'm disappointed is the first 2 games I mentioned, Penn State, Oregon, and Georgia, Bama, I think are played around or at the same time. So you better get that double box going on your TV or have multiple monitors set up. It's a bummer that we can't enjoy each of those on their own, but that's scheduling gods, and I don't know how that's made. But I say all that to say thanks so much for tuning in. It's been fun doing solo shows, but Ben will be all back together on Wednesday. We'll be able to truly dive into all of the games, even at an even deeper level. I miss Jace. I know you, Jace, you had fun on this trip, but you got to get back here. We got to talk some football together. We haven't done it together in a very long time, and we got to change that. But like I said, thank you so much for tuning in. We're everywhere on socials, YouTube, Flag for Discussion. We are on Twitter at F4Discussion, on TikTok at Flag4Discussion, anywhere you get your podcast at Flag for Discussion. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening in. If you made it this long, appreciate you. We'll be back together. Jace will be back. I'll be here. We got some fun things planned for our preview show this coming week for week 5. It's been a great week 4. Week 5 is about to be probably even crazier. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Farbod Merkazi. It's been Flag for Discussion.